Okay, let's do a little review. So we're going to actually take it from page Kuf Zayin. If everyone can turn your booklets to page Kuf Zayin, we're going to be the third paragraph down. And I'm going to we did this paragraph, I'm just going to just review it to get our heads back into the game. We took a day off. So if you recall, we spoke about Yaakov having the letters of Az Yibaka Kashachar Orecha from a pasuk. Actually, it's a pasuk we say in Sukkot for each one of the seven avos and tzaddikim that have the ushpizin, right? So other traditions comes from the Zohar, have pasukim for each one. They say they like do a special invite for them. We don't do the whole song and dance, but we discuss the inyanim of those pasukim. And Yaakov's pasuk is Az Yibaka Kashachar Orecha. Then it will break through like morning your light. We discussed that he represents the kav and the penimius of the kav, breaking forth into the tzimtzum and bringing infinite into finite, if you recall. And this idea was essentially because he reached the Tiferes. Yaakov represents Tiferes HaNe'elam, the hidden Tiferes, which we said was coming from really the essence of God himself. Whereas even though we spoke about it last night as well, but even though the Or Ein Sof and the Tzimtzum also come from the essence, but they are like powers that Hashem releases from the essence, and therefore when each one comes out, they're in opposition to the other. Whereas when they're in their source, those two opposites actually reside as one, and in order to therefore bind them together, when they come out of their source, you have to reach up and bring out them as they are in their source, which is essentially a fusion of opposites. And this is Yaakov's business, right? Yaakov means to break forth, which means he can break the boundaries of the opposition between the infinite light and the tzimtzum. And so his name means to break forth. And why? Because he breaks these boundaries of Gilui and tzimtzum. However, what was the limitation of Yaakov? Who can recall? Seeming limitation. Say it again. Thank you, Shmuel. The good call. It's he couldn't bring it down past Atzilus. The kav is mistayim, the sofa Atzilus. So remember we said he connects the top to the bottom, but the top of heaven to the bottom of heaven. He doesn't connect to earth. Now actually, as bespoke, Yaakov does not have a limitation, because Yaakov really means to break for all boundaries, but the revelation of breaking forth even further boundaries, which is brought about by Yosef, we said, but really Yosef is just revealing what Yaakov has, right? It's not Yosef's thing. Yosef is Hosafa. It's an addition to show that Yaakov can go even further. So Eila told us Yosef is really the offspring of Yaakov himself is Yosef. But what is Yosef? How do we describe the addition of Yosef? Okay, it comes into the worlds of Bia, we said, right? That instead of just bringing the infinite light into Atzilus, which are Kalim for godliness, for infinite godliness, Yosef goes and brings the light into the further lower worlds of Bria Tzirasiya. Okay, but why is that a continuation of Yaakov's boundary breaking? Where opposites do we see coming together there? This is a little bit more complicated. We spoke about it though. Does anyone remember?
For Yosef?
Yeah. What opposites need to be brought together in Yosef's tafkid and his function, whereas Yaakov brought together Gilui and Tzimtzum, and he made the two opposite things of revelation and Tzimtzum reside as one. How does Yosef bring the light into Bia, Bria Tzirasiya, and therefore fuse opposites? Yeah.
Etzem and Ishpashtus.
Etzem is Pashtus, yeah. Yes, I would say that's correct. Let's look at what that means. So what we're saying is, let's look inside, and we'll see the words of the Rebbe will help us a little bit. If you take it from the paragraph I mentioned, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down, the third paragraph down on page Kuf Zayin, 5 lines into that paragraph, there's a period. Is there any more copies of the Mimer, or have them out? No? Make some more. Okay, so it says, "Aval adayin yisharu hagedarim shebe'inyan hagilui atzmo." What are still the limitations is there's still the boundaries of the revelations itself. Before Yaakov was able to blend the boundaries of tzimtzum and gilui, revelation and concealment. But there still is a difference in the realm of revelation itself, right? Hachiluk ben gilui shebechinas sovei v'gilui shebechinas hislavshus. What's the difference? Because the light which comes into the worlds, okay, it can shine in the world of Atzilus, but it cannot shine into the worlds of Biyah, or can it? Right? There's two lights over there. There's the light of the Etzem, and there's the light of his Pashtus, as you mentioned, right? The infinite light, and we spoke about it as sort of the drop of water in the ocean. There's two lights, right, inside the Or Ein Sof. So the infinite light can be everywhere. Nothing, because remember what we said regarding the etzem of the or, the infinite aspect of the light, is that the tzimtzum didn't really happen as far as it was concerned. There's a lot going on here. I'm trying to bring everybody back to the table. I'm realizing it's a little bit difficult to just jump in. We spoke about many great things, but we said that the infinite light, the effect of that the tzimtzum had on it, was only that it stopped being seen by the creation. But the light itself did not actually get blocked out, and as far as it's concerned, the light is concerned, it still shines in every place. Do you remember that? Yeah? Whereas the other form of light that was before the tzimtzum, which is like the drop of water, which will be the source of creation, that light actually was affected by the tzimtzum to the point that it became diminished and changed through the tzimtzum itself. Whereas the infinite light, the tzimtzum didn't actually affect it. As far as it was concerned, its only function was that it disabled the world from seeing it, but it's actually everywhere. So what do we see from here? That when it comes to the revelation of light, the infinite part of the light it has a different category than the revealed part of the light. In other words, that light which comes into the Atzilus and can be seen, which of the two lights are in Atzilus?
The revealed.
The kav itself, there's two parts of the kav, right? The first part of the kav doesn't take either of them, right? It's just the idea of creating finite. But this third part, which we're talking about is Yaakov, it takes both of them, right? It brings the infinite light back into the finite place, and therefore it returns the etzem ha'or, but it reveals the etzem ha'or. That infinite light can be seen in Atzilus. Isn't that the whole point of this third stage? That it returns the infinite Or Ein Sof that was blocked by the tzimtzum and brings it back? So the infinite light, which is basically the Etzem Ha'or, actually comes in a state of hislavshus and can be seen, right? So in Atzilus, we got both in check. What happens when you get to Biyah? The infinite light is there, but it can't be seen. So we see that there's a limitation in the realm of revelation. There's a type of revelations that can be seen. There's a type of revelations that can't be seen, right? The infinite light cannot show up in the kelim of Biyah. They're not a kli for it. So even though we have Yaakov breaking forth, and there's this like kind of unlimitedness of paratzta, here comes Yaakov, because he fused together the Giloy and the Tzimtzum, and he fused opposites. When it comes out after Atzilus, opposites kind of come up again, because there's now categorization of the infinite light. It can be there, but it can't be seen. So that's a limitation on the infinite light. It can't be seen. So what Yosef does is he enables the infinite light to be seen even in Biyah, where there's really are no kalim for it. Atzilus had a leg up, because Atzilus' spheros were basically invisible or transparent, or whatever you're going to call them. They were godly, so it's not such a big deal for the infinite light to show up in the kalim of Atzilus. But when there's no kalim that can hold this light, that is a limitation on the light, that it can't shine unless there's kalim. Well, we want to have Yabaka. We want to have Yaakov breaking through for all boundaries, which means he can bring the infinite light to shine even in a place where there are no kalim for it. And this is the function of Yosef, that he continues the kav to show up in a way of Islavshus, in a way that can be seen, even though it's the etzem of the or, even though it's the infinite light, it actually can be held inside of finite worlds which are not kalim for it. And now we've completed sort of the usage of Yaakov as Yabaka, as a breaking forth, and as a limitless one, because Yosef revealed the limitation, the unlimitedness of Yaakov even in the lower worlds. Does anyone follow any of that? I don't know if I could say that again.
Is Joseph actually like creating Kalim in the lower world?
Not creating Kalim. It's not creating Kalim. It's like the way we defined it before is like you can put on a pair of like leather straps and all of a sudden they contain the infinite Or Ein Sof. That's not because your leather straps are Kalim for it. Yeah. The spheres of Atzilus are Kalim for it. They're a type of thing that holds infinity. But your leather straps don't hold infinity in and of themselves. They're finite. And yet, because of Yosef, and really Moshe, we said Moshe brought the bones of Yosef, they were like sort of the same level, that you're something which is not a Kli for the Or Ein Sof can nonetheless hold the Or Ein Sof. Why? Because it's unlimited. Unless the Or Ein Sof can be everywhere, there's a limitation on the Or Ein Sof. So the whole idea of in other words, at first, the Tzimtzum itself is blocking the Or Ein Sof because there's a limitation on the light. Then, even after it crosses over the boundary of the Tzimtzum, there's still a limitation of the light. Okay, you can shine, but only in Kalim that holds you. No, I'm unlimited Or Ein Sof. I can shine anywhere, and I can even be seen anywhere. Right? So this shows on a true level of limitlessness on the Or Ein Sof. When something which is not even a Kli for it, it can shine up and be revealed to that thing.
Same thing with our Rabbi and the Frierdiker Rebbe, in a way. The Frierdiker Rebbe brought it down to America, and the Rebbe really just exploded it onto every corner of the world for this knowledge.
He's maintaining that Yosef, in the Maimer, is Yosef, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and Yosef, and he already brought it into Kalim that we're not shy for it by bringing it to America. Because America is not a Kli for Elokus, let's say, and yet Yosef brought it there. What's the Rebbe? He's like the Moshe to Yosef. In other words, basically, he like completes the job and he brings it everywhere. But he couldn't have done it without Yosef, which is what the Rebbe is constantly saying. Like didn't see himself as an individual. He's just his father-in-law, because ultimately this was accomplished by Yosef. Remember, this is a mimer given to the Rebbe from the Rebbe Rashab to his son Yosef on his bar mitzvah, showing him his tafki, that you will be this Yosef. Yeah.
So the process is basically it's the same fusion of infinite and finite that Yaakov did. It's just happening again
in the Giloi,
where the level of Tzimtzum is actually creating a finite space, as opposed to before where the level of Tzimtzum fused with Gilui wasn't so much of a contraction.
Because it was the world of Atzilus was the result.
Right, because you were still...
It was a major contraction, right. And really infinite light really even has no business being there because the Tzimtzum blocked it out. However, Yaakov accomplished to bring it out. He could only bring it out where there was at least Kalim for it.
Okay.
The way the Rebbe describes it here is that Yaakov broke the boundary and fused opposites by fusing infinite with finite. Okay. Right? Or what he says here is like Gilui and Tzimtzum. I should put it like this. Right. Let's use the Rebbe's words. Yaakov, Gilui and Tzimtzum are opposites, right? Revelation and contraction are opposites. Yaakov put them together. You can have revelation in the place of contraction. But there's still a problem, because even after you've done that, there's now opposites in terms of the Gilui. Even the Gilui itself. Some Gilui can be seen by the world, some Gilui can't be seen by the world. Those two are now opposites, and basically in categories which are incompatible. And so Yosef brings those together, even those Giluim which officially can't be seen because they're sovev and don't fit into Kalim. Nonetheless, they can be fit into Kalim because we're breaking all the boundaries. That's the basic long and short of it. I don't understand either, man.
Is the product of Yaakov's fusion that product, does that go on the side of that? Does that like come to be the next when Yosef does his avodah, what he fuses together is the part that's contraction, that's tzimtzum. Is that the product of Yaakov's fusion?
What?
So like asking who's doing the fusion of the Etzem and the Or and the
when Yaakov mixes the side when Yosef
okay.
when he fuses the finite and the infinite, right?
Wait, that's Yaakov's doing that.
Okay, so Yosef is fusing
Sovev and Mamali, let's say. He's making Sovev, which is light that is infinite and cannot be seen by worlds. He's saying, who said? It's infinite. let it be seen by the world, let it come into the world. So he's fusing in the realm of revelation, revelations which can't be seen, which revelations which can be seen. In other words, that which is above the vessels, he's making it go into the vessels.
But what he's fusing, the revelations that can't be seen and the revelations that
Can
can't be seen, that can and that can't, the ones that can, those ones they're akin to the side of Gevura, right? They're akin to the side of Tzimtzum, the ones that can.
I don't know what you're saying. You can try again.
Like the fusion of Yaakov, it's Gilui and Tzimtzum.
Yes,
Yeah.
he's making those two things reside simultaneously, even though they're opposites.
Infinite and finite. In a way.
Gilu and Tzimtzum, he calls it here. Let's keep the language.
So what is Yosef doing there?
Yosef, well, he let him finish his question.
When Yosef does what he does, he fuses what's Sovev and Memale, right?
Basically, he's making Sovev, which has still a limitation. The light, which is now broken forth and shined in a finite world, still yet has a limitation. This is what Yosef does, because it can't shine to the world. It's still blocked out from the world being able to experience it. That's a limitation on the light, right? It can do that in Atzilus. The world of Atzilus can handle the revelation, but not the lower worlds. So Yosef's inyan is to bring the light to the lower worlds in a way that they can perceive it, which hitherto it had a limitation. It couldn't be perceived by finite things or by worldly things, by the earth. Okay?
So what I'm asking is basically in those two avodas, like on one side you have a side which is like expansive, on one side you have a side which is contraction, right?
Okay.
And for Yosef it's Gilui and Tzimtzum. What I'm asking is, are those like the result of each other?
Yes.
Or is what Yosef taking on the side of Tzimtzum, is that the result of the fusion is what Yosef taking on the side of Tzimtzum, is that the result of the fusion of Yaakov?
More than the result, we're saying it is Yaakov. That's the whole point. We're saying that Eile told us Yaakov, Yosef. It's Yaakov's power to break boundaries. He is Ufarasta Yam Vakem Tzfona B'Negba. Yaakov breaks all the boundaries. He's the Tiferes HaNelam. It's just that Yosef sort of is like putting like a Wi-Fi extender, right? It's still coming from the same Wi-Fi. He's just bringing it over there. So it's the same Yaakov. It's the same force. It's this that breaks boundaries. Let it through Yosef's help. It'll break the boundaries over there, right?
What's Kav?
Kav is the line of light that comes after the Tzimtzum. Last question.
I was just going to try to clarify. Is this an accurate way to use the terms? Yosef is combining the etzem with the pashtus, which is like the infinite.
The light, yes.
The infinite with the finite.
But no, the etzem is pashtus is what the reason I'm like sort of agreeing with you here is because those are two aspects of light. I think you mean the etzem ha'or and these pashtus of the or.
How would you describe it? What is he combining?
So I'm saying there's three things here, right? There's the actual etzem, which is essentially, and then there's the etzem ha'or, and then there's pashtus ha'or. All right. So there's really three things. Now the etzem, when it shows itself as tzimtzum, because when the etzem wants to come shining, it puts all the light away. So now the etzem is in conflict with both the etzem of the or and these pashtus of the or. If the etzem itself wants to come out, it puts away etzem and these pashtus of the or. Okay? So Yaakov comes back and he says, let's bring those two things back together. Etzem and these pashtus of the or can exist after the tzimtzum. You understanding this so far?
I want to ask like a simpler question. Yosef is combining blank and blank. What two terms would you put?
What he puts here is sovev.
Yosef, not Yaakov.
You're talking about Yosef. He doesn't say mamali. He says sovev and hislavshus. If you remember the term hislavshus, it means to encloak, to be able to for the creation to perceive when something goes inside of you. Right? That's the limitation of the sovev, is that it does not go into a state of hislavshus. It does not get encloaked into the parameters of the creation. It can be everywhere, but it's not encloaked inside of us. It's not perceived. So that's what Yosef does. He fuses the sovev to go and to be in a state of islavshus.
Yeah.
Before that, the sovev was unable to be in a state of islavshus, Yosef enables that, so he fuses those two opposites,
Yosef-
which is, as you said before, a fusion of the etzem and these postures of the or. If you want to,
actually, no, I want to use the term
Okay.
they use is like Yosef combines Sovav and Lovesh, and then Yaakov extends that into...
no, other way around.
Yeah.
Yosef is the extender. Yaakov is the first one.
Yeah, that's
Yaakov fuses etzem and tzimtzum and giloy. Yosef extends that to fuse sovev and hislapshus.
Yaakov combines Simsum and Giloy. Yosef extends that to combine Sovav and
Hislapshus. Yes. A raise of hands, even halfway up, if you're understanding this concept at all. Don't be shy. I need to know before we go on if I need to review this again. So if you don't want to hear this again, raise your hand.
That's a different question.
Okay. Fine. There was enough hands to move on, I believe.
That's the third.
So, fine. I think we got it. Look, it is what it is. Let's move on to Oz Hey, and we'll see.
With a mimer like this, you can do it 25 times and still barely grasp the bottom of it.
Say it again.
With a mimer like this, you can go over it 25 times and barely grasp the bottom of it.
It's amazing. It's actually amazing mimer. That's I just want to make sure this is a perfect example, right? It could be sovev or be hislapshus. If you understand it, then you've brought this vast idea into your actual mind and you sort of own it, even though at first it's an idea that's really beyond your kelim. But that's what Chabad Chassidus allows us to do. It allows us to put into our little human kelim things that are really beyond the kelim of man. It's like Atzilus talk, and yet Yosef brings it into our brains. Okay. Hey. Al pi ze yesh levar gam ma shekasuv ba'maimer. We can, based on all this, we can explain what it says in the Maimer. Da'atam al zeh sha'gilu v'biyah hu dafka de Yosef. Why is it the revelation that goes into the lower three worlds of Bria, Tzir, and Asiya, specifically through Yosef? Ki Yosef hu b'chinas Yesod. Because Yosef represents the sphere of Yesod, right? Yaakov was Tiferes. Yosef, we're saying, takes the whole matter down further because he represents the sphere of Yesod. What's the concept of Yesod? Yesod is Gamar HaHashpa, right? Yesod represents the completion of the Shefa. In other words, the way that the completion of the Shefa, look at what actually Yesod does for a second, and then we'll understand a little bit better. There's obviously a Malchus that comes later, which is like through the Rebbe, but that's not where we are, right? But if you want to create the seed that creates man, right, to make a baby, where does the seed come from in the body? Does anyone know?
The brain.
The brain, right? The brain does not have any little seeds in it. So some spiritual situation takes place, which goes down the spinal cord, according to the Tanya, and it takes like basically the essence of yourself, and it puts it into a physical seed, right? So when the fact that you have a physical seed which contains your entire essence inside of it, this is called, at some level, it's called the Gamar HaShpa. It's the conclusion of the Shefa of spirituality, Pasha, turning into physicality, right? In the most simple sense. It's not a joke. Like, you'd think that such a thing can never be. This is actually a perfect example of what we're talking about. It's like, how could you put the Orain Sof inside of a little seed? There's no way that that's a kli for my entire being in existence, right? This is what Yosef basically does, right? He brings infinite light into, like, straps on the arms of your tefillin. What does it even mean? It's impossible, right? So, but the same thing happens in your own body. You can produce a physical drop which contains the essence of God inside of it, basically. So this is called the Gamar HaShpa. It's like when it's finished coming out and actually is concluded in its journey of materializing. This is what Yesod represents. And that's why Yosef is the one who's responsible for this whole second journey of Yaakov, is because he represents Yesod Gamar HaShpa, the conclusion of the Shefa coming out and like really manifesting in full. He's going to give a better analogy. This is my best shot at it, but let's start with that. The Ikar HaTainug VaSimcha Hu Begamar HaShpa. When do you really have the ultimate joy and pleasure? Only when the thing is fully baked, right? When it's done. That's when you could say, like, you're happy and you're having the pleasure. You don't have the pleasure of completing a task until it actually gets to the end of its journey, and it's like That's what I didn't want, like a theoretical essence of myself in a little seed. I want it done. I want it baked. The whole me is in there. Only when the job is complete can I say that I will experience joy from this. K'mavur Sham Baruch, as he explains in the Maimer that this is based on length. We'll get a better analogy, and it's going to sit more properly. And therefore, because Yosef represents the completion of the hashpah, he is able to bring the revelation into the lower three worlds of Bia, Bria, Yitzira, Asiya. But tzrich lahavin my hashaychas de inyan agilu de bia la tainug basimcha shebegamer hashpah. We have to understand what is the correlation between bringing the revelation down into the lower three worlds to the idea of the joy that happens at the end of the shefa. When you finish and complete a task, there's this certain joy. Why is that? In the Maimer, he associates that with Yosef bringing the light to Bia. What exactly is that association? Why is it not enough? Right? In order to bring light into Bia, why couldn't we get a level where there was a pleasure that it takes place in the beginning or the middle of the hashpah, right? There's also a certain level of pleasure that takes place when you start a task, right? Or even in the middle of the task, like you're getting it done. There's a certain aspect of joy that comes out. We're saying only when you finish the task is the joy sufficient in order to push the revelation into the lower worlds. Let's explain. The quality of joy that takes place when you finish the shefa coming out. And here he gives his example. Right? So the analogy was only so good, and here's the reason why. The real finishing of the hashpah is when the hashpah goes into the receiver and you complete the task by basically handing over the baton to someone else that's going to receive it. And here's the analogy that I was promising would come. You look in footnote 45. He says, the Maimer there, he gives this analogy. Like a person, shemechin suda besimchas bano. Like a person who's getting his son's wedding feast together. Right? Umazmin kroyim ve'echol. And he brings all of his friends and he puts the wedding invitations out. So, right, this is basically a happy time for this father. Right? Even when he's making the wedding invitations, even when he's preparing the food, he's doing this besimcha. This is like a great joy that's going to make his son's suda. But the ikar simcha and the tainug of the bala simcha, the main joy of this father is when the suda's over. Literally, achar shekavar achlu akroyim, when everybody ate already. Not that he's preparing the shefa, but they actually ate the food. Right? And they received this joy from what they ate and what they were satisfied with. Right? And only the father will only really be happy when he sees everybody with a smile on their face. They had their wine, they had their meat, they're satisfied and satiated. That's called Gomer Hashpah. That's finishing the job of the shefa. When it's, and again, what's the ikar here? That it was, the shefa was not just being prepared, it was actually received by those it was being prepared for, and they have contained it, right? So I guess the analogy in the seed, it can be understood on its own. So the idea is that this type of joy, which is called yesod, right, is required level of joy, right? If we're talking about Hashem's being the one having this joy, the tainug and the pleasure that comes out of God, right, is the same thing. He only really reveals his true pleasure when there's a reception on the part of the receiver, and that's when the pleasure is full. When Malchus receives, right? So in other words, the Yesod is giving, but the true joy of the Yesod to give is only when there's a receiver that's actually received it. That's when the true joy of Yesod takes place, right? So he says, "Hu sha'ataynu magia ba'etzem shelamayla mishurash hashpa." Now this is a slightly dance that we have to bring some analogies to understand this line. What happens at this state is that pleasure that's reached at that point reaches a level of the essence, which is above even the root of the shefa. Let me give you an analogy because this is kind of complicated. And he says here one more line, which we're going to riff on for a second. There's a statement which says, what's last indeed is first in thought. We know this line. We say it on Shabbos. And what he says here is there's like a Hasidic way of reading this. Sof Ma'asehu Kabbalas Hashpa. So the last indeed is exactly what we just described. It's when the people ate and drank and are merry. The end of the shefa is what's called Sof Maisa, the last thing that happens in the deed, right? We can agree on this? Now what he says is this last thing that happens in the deed is first in thought, right? It was what he intended originally. But this is, we learn slightly differently than normal. Zem Magiv Machshava Techila. We say that this basically last thing in deed reaches up to the person's origination of this thing, and it sort of completes the task. In other words, in a simple way of putting it, when a person puts the finishing touches on the house that he's building, right, what's last indeed, then all of a sudden, what was first in thought, which was his perfect house with all the finishing touches and it's all done, he triggers that, right? And he's like, oh, there it is. So that original pleasure that he had by imagining this house all perfect, he basically finds that origin of the pleasure when he does the last final deed, because he enlivens that original picture that he had in his mind only at the end. So that's what we normally mean when we say what's last in deed is first in thought. He arrives at the first thought only by the last deed, right? But here he says something slightly different, and we'll slow down and look at this properly. Just want to get to the point where I can explain myself. He says, "Hainu batachila shlifnei v'lamayla metachilas hamachshava, shoresh hashpa." Here he explains slightly differently. He says, "What's last indeed, don't read it that it's first in thought. It's the first thing he thought of, but you can read the words machshava techila. Instead of saying it was first in his thought, it can mean it was first before his thought, right?" It was a beginning that preceded and was above the first machshava, the first thought. And what is the first thought? The first thought, as I mentioned a second ago, is the source of the shefa. In other words, when you think of the perfect house, right, it's already sort of come this picture into your mind. You would think that's called the first thought. We're going to soon see that it's not called the first thought. There's something that precedes that first thought. But when you imagine the perfect house, you then start to bring this perfect house into action. You start to hire the workers and take out the loans, etc. And finally, at the end, you've put the silver doorknobs on and you finish Sof Maisa, the end of the deed. And what have you reached? Seemingly, you've reached the original picture of this house in your mind. But actually, what we're saying is that there's a first thought before that. There's something that precedes the source of the shefa, right? Which is the source of the shefa, is the imagining of this house that's coming out of my mind. We're saying there's a place that you can go before that. It's something intrinsic before I even thought of it. And that place, which is intrinsic before I even thought of it, gets triggered when I have the Sof Maisa, when the house is done, or even more so when people are going to be living in the house, when there's the eating and the drinking of the Suda, and it's received by the Makabo. Let me give you yet another example of how this works, right?
Are you talking about a flash of Chachma?
The flash of Chachma would be the first thought, and what we're saying is there's something that precedes the first thought. Sof Maaseh, yeah, you could call it that. It's even higher than will, is the truth. But the Sof Maaseh, last indeed, what does it get to? Machshava techila, how we're defining this right now, is what's techila before the machshava. What's first before the machshava, right? So let me explain. Let's just break this down for a second and try and have a whole other way of looking at this to make it understandable. Hopefully. There's an idea that there is a machloikis, whether the heavens were created before the earth or the earth was created before the heavens. Where do we get this? It's a machloikis in the Gemara of Chagiga, and it says, one pasuk says, "Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'es haaretz," right? One pasuk literally says Hashem created the heavens and the earth. Another pasuk says, "B'yom bara havai Elokim es eretz v'shamayim." Another one says Hashem created the earth and then the heavens. So there's a machlokes. So how do we understand this? They're both true, of course, in the Hasidic way. And how does it work? In, so to speak, the realm of thought, right? How things are sort of by Hashem. Really, the earth comes first. Because he, just like we're saying regarding this house, right? He basically wanted to create this sof ma'aseh. Like the whole reason that there's anything is because it originated with what he wants at the end. So the earth comes first as far as Hashem concerned, and only then the heavens, because what is the heavens? It's basically, okay, how am I going to pull this off, right? So he starts to think about what that would look like. You with me? So in God's perspective, you have the earth and then the heaven. In the perspective of creation, how do things actually come about? The earth came after the heavens. Hashem made the heavens, and then the heavens sort of materialized into the earth. So you have like a cycle called earth, heaven, heaven, earth. By Hashem, there's the earth first and then the heaven, and these two things reside inside of Hashem's space, right? And then in terms of how the world perceives it, there's the heaven and then the earth, right?
Hashem's first original
It's not now, the idea of the heavens by Hashem is when he kind of brings this thing out for the first time and like sort of perceives it. The earth is a very deep intrinsic level of his desire, you could call it will, right? Which is not even showing up yet on the screen of Hashem. It's just like a person, for example, you yourself, you don't even realize it right now, but you have your dream house inside of your heart. It says, Misha ein lo bayis, eino adam. Someone who doesn't have a house is not a man. What's this mimer called? Be a man, right? You are a man, so therefore you want a house. But you're not even married yet. You're not even really looking at that house market yet. It's something so deep inside of you, it hasn't even shown up on your own screen, right? That what even this house looks like. But you have an intrinsic need for this house, and you don't even realize it. Maybe you do, but it's so deep inside. That's called the earth before the heavens in you, right? Now, when you're going to get the heavens in you, you'll actually think about the house. And then what happens next? Then there's the heaven and the earth in terms of the actual reality of this house, which means you're going to actually start hiring workers. It's come out of the dream of your own being. And you're going to actually go through the heavenly process of dealing with contractors. and you're going to eventually have the earth at the end of it where you put the final silver door handles on, right? So you can see how these four processes. What we're saying like this right now is sof maaseh, the end indeed, it doesn't just reach to the machshava of the earth as it is in Hashem's mind. It reaches to before the machshava. It reaches to the earth above, right? The lower earth, which is the final actual action, it taps into that inner essence of what you didn't even realize that you knew. The earth inside of you is very deep. It's part of your essence. It's even before it shines. So now if we want to put our no, not at all. What we're talking about, I don't know, with the little dot in the Ein Sof, what we're talking about is like this. Now let's put it into our framework, right? The earth inside of you is what we were calling before the essence of God. Period. It's just the essence of God. It contains all things. It contains the revelation. It contains the tzimtzum, but it's just the essence of God. The machshava, right, is essentially the Or Ein Sof, right? The machshava is the Or Ein Sof, because this is how there's a certain type of revelation, and then this Or Ein Sof has two parts. It has the etzem and the ispashtus, right? This is the machshava of your machshava, and even the machshava that happens after in the second heaven. And what happens is at the end, when you get to the earth, you reach back up to the etzem. When you finally finish the hashpah, let's put it back into the words of the mimer, Yosef, his idea is finishing the hashpah, the eating of the guests, so to speak. When it's all done, when you hit that level, you go back and tap into the essence of Hashem mamish, and therefore, at that level of the essence of Hashem, you're able to, it precedes even the machshava. And therefore, even the machshava had two parts. It had the infinite light and the finite light. When you go to that very, very highest essence, which precedes either of the machshavas, it's able to fuse both those machshavas together because it's higher than both of them, and therefore it contains both of them as one, and therefore it can put the big machshava into the little machshava. It can put the infinite light and make it be revealed. So when you get to the sof masa, you wind up at the essence, and this is why we're saying that Yosef specifically, who represents the finishing of the hashpah, he represents the sof masa, the end deed, he reaches to the essence. Once you reach to that essence, therefore you can bend those two lights and make them as one. Because you've gone beyond the source of the light. Right? The source of the hashpah would be the Or Ein Sof. So if you're standing there, the Or Ein Sof has an intrinsic contradiction within itself. There's parts of light that can be seen. There's parts of light that no vessel can hold. So if you're dealing with just the heavenly realm, the source of the hashpah, there's still a dichotomy there. And therefore those things, if they would just come out, they would wind up fragmenting. But if you go to the essence, which precedes the source of the hashpah, it contains both the sovev light and the ability for the hislabshus as one. Therefore, it and it alone can put the sovev into a state of hislabshus. When does that essence come out? When you finish the hashpah, when you get to the bottom, which is Yosef. Therefore, Yosef has the ability of fusing these two levels of Giloi together. Yes.
So when you get to that final level, which is basically accomplished in the most when you're doing a mitzvah, right?
Say it again.
That final level of fusion is basically accomplished the best by doing a mitzvah. Like when you get the pleasure of people eating or you finish the house,
Yeah.
That's like in the Ratzon Hashem, that's doing a mitzvah.
Exactly. That's us doing the mitzvah.
Right. And so essentially, because you're reaching the essence before even those two levels of Ein Sof, when you're doing the mitzvah, you're creating the whole world. Because
you're drawing forth the machshava
Right.
and the other machshava. Everything comes from there.
Right.
Exactly.
So it's like you're at the end, up until there you're working up like this,
Right.
and then once you reach the final action,
Right.
it's like it flips, and now you're the one like creating the whole thing from
Because
bottom up.
right, you're bringing the essence. Once you trigger the essence, then you automatically trigger all the giluim.
Right.
So you're basically responsible for bringing the Or Ein Sof out of Hashem.
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. We don't really realize what we're doing when we do a mitzvah. If we
Creating
did,
the
we
world.
would run around doing them all day long without stopping, right?
You're creating the whole world and the Shemayim.
Right. Okay. So I don't know if that really got into you guys. I tried, but once again, in one line, Yosef represents the end of the hashpah, the true pleasure, like we're saying, like this essential need that you don't even realize that you have to have a house, which is like your essential pleasure. That will only really come out and be triggered when it's done, right? And so therefore, that essential pleasure, which is only triggered at the sof of the hashpah, the end of the hashpah, this is what truly fuses all opposites together. Because it precedes even the light, therefore it obviously contains both types of light inside of it. It contains infinite light, and it contains the ability to put that infinite light anywhere at once, because at that level of the essence there are absolutely zero limitations. Before you get to that essence, if you're only dealing with the light, you are going to have the natural limitations that light has. Some light is too high to be perceived. Because if you're only grabbing onto light, the source of what you're working with has intrinsic limitations on it. And you've only reached that place, you're not going to get beyond those limitations. If you reach the essence from whence this light came, obviously it can do anything. It can do whatever it wants with this light. It's not limited by the limitations of the light. It creates the light. So therefore, it can also say infinite light can be found in a finite place. So that ability to unearth that level of essence, right, which would then enable infinite light to be found in a finite place, you only unearth such a pleasure and intrinsic tainuk from Hashem when you finish the hashpah. And therefore Yosef, who's called the end of the hashpah, he bakes the seed. It's done, right? Therefore he has the power of accessing the essence and therefore fusing the infinite light into a finite world, because at that level there are no limitations. Got it? Good. Okay. 3 lines down. 3 lines down from this top paragraph, page Kuf Ches. Therefore, specifically by the conclusion of the shefa, right? Or the pleasure, I should say, that comes from the concluding the shefa. That's when you get this pritzas ubitul gidre hagiloi. That's when you break forth and undo all the boundaries that were previously found in the revelations, which was that some revelations can be perceived and some cannot, right? That the Or Ein Sof itself has a certain restriction, that it is too high to be contained in certain kelim, and that boundary is done with when you access the essence of the pleasure, which comes about by hitting Yosef, which is the completion of the hashpah. Therefore, the revelation at the level of hislavshus, which means to be contained inside of the experience of the creation, the revelation of the kav goes all the way down and reveals itself even into biyah, places where the vessels themselves have a limitation that cannot experience infinity. Guess what? You just knocked on the door of the essence. He's going to undo that little limitation for you. And here in the physical world, even we can experience Pashut infinity. We can have our hands on infinite light, the essence of the Or, which is beyond Hislavshus. We nonetheless have it and we're holding it, which, as you said, is basically the union of a mitzvah. Okay. I think we should hold here, to be honest with you, because the next segment is a whole nother doozy. You can have a question if you want.
Do you understand why mitzvah is that way? Is it because the mitzvah is, like, why is the mitzvah ultimate expression of the infinite and the finite? It's because the mitzvah is...
Well, the mitzvah, let's say, is the finishing of the hashpah, right? Hashem has, so to speak, mitzvahs above. Like, he does the mitzvahs, right? Which is we're going to get to in the next paragraph. Right, it says that we do the mitzvahs of Hashem. Chukav mishpatav Yisrael. There's a pasuk that says He gave His statutes and His commandments to the Jewish people, which means He has them before He gives them to us. So that's like the heavenly lights coming down. His mitzvahs are like the heavenly lights coming down. Only when those heavenly lights coming down and we get to eat them and we get to be satisfied with them, that would be like, so to speak, the completion of the hashpah, because it comes into the physical world and what He prepared for the Suda can actually be contained and eaten below. So the mitzvah represents the tapping into the essence of Hashem.
Okay.
First day back, no sweat.
Oh yeah, that was a pretty hard place to start.
Go ahead.
What does the Torah represent?
The Torah is like the heaven in terms of that. If you talk about the Torah just as the ideas of the Torah, it's sort of like Him coming down from above. But there's something called the mitzvah of Talmud Torah as well. When you do the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, so that's also a mitzvah. But if you're talking about just like sort of the giving of Torah, that's not the Gomer Hashpah. It's when we accept the Torah and we fulfill the Torah, that's when we can say we ate it. His giving of the Torah is essentially preparing the Suda for His son in a certain sense. Mazel Tov. Okay.